and we're going to do this in alphabetical order by last name. And so we would like an opportunity to start with Hugo to give us sort of a 2 minute, as we said before, explanation of introduce yourself and kind of just tell everyone a little bit about your background. So go ahead, Hugo.
Well, first of all, thank you so much for putting on this great forum here. And we certainly have all to adjust to COVID. I believe that the prosecuting attorney is the most unique attorney, not only in the county, but in the world. Because I believe the prosecutor, as our Supreme Court has said, is first and foremost a minister of justice. A minister of justice is dedicated to doing justice for everyone, not just representing the police and securing prosecution. I'm from Ann Arbor, lifelong resident, went to Ann Arbor Public Schools, graduated from Pioneer High School in 1973, received the Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. Award. I'm the second African American to obtain the rank of Eagle Scout in Washtenaw County. When I was in the 7th grade, a transformative thing happened in my life. In April of 1968. That was the day that Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. was assassinated. And I tell you, in the 7th grade, going to school, I have to be very candid with you. I remember some of my white teachers seeing the black students being upset, and they really couldn't understand why, you know? And I remember one of them thanked me for not being disruptive like the other blacks. That always sat strange with me. And as I grew older, I began to understand how we can never understand the humanity of someone else unless we're willing to accept the humanity of someone else. So for me, I went to the University of Michigan, graduated in 3 years with distinction, went to the University of Toledo College of Law, graduated, passed the bar on the first attempt, interned briefly at the prosecuting attorney's office, and became the,
30 seconds.
And became the Chief Assistant Public Defender. I'm running because I believe that I'm best qualified to be a minister of justice, to bring restorative justice to everyone. Defended over 800 victims of domestic violence and protect the defendant rights of juveniles and those who least able to protect and defend themselves. Experience matters, and I certainly would put my experience to the forefront against anyone in this race. I believe people are best served when we acknowledge their humanity, and we can end mass incarceration on our local level to the best of our ability through repealing truth in sentencing. We have an opportunity to do that this November. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Hugo. So now on to our next candidate, Ellie, if you'd like to go ahead and do the same, introduce yourself.
Absolutely, and thank you so much for putting this on. So my name's Ellie Savit. You'll hear it pronounced Eli too. Don't care what you call me, just vote the box next to ELI on August 4th. I grew up, born and raised here in Ann Arbor. I started my career actually as a public school history teacher. I taught special education and general education courses, which is actually something that really influences how I think about our criminal justice system, and I hope we get a chance to talk about that tonight. Started my career in private practice, represented everybody from domestic violence victims, victims of consumer fraud, kids with disabilities, and criminal defendants. And after that, I had the tremendous opportunity to work on the U.S. Supreme Court for Justice Ruth Bader Ginsburg. And at the end of that clerkship, I decided to come home. I decided to move back to Michigan, and I accepted a job as a senior legal counsel at the city of Detroit, where I lead our public interest litigation work. Among other things, I've led major cases against banks and slumlords that are harming the community, maintaining their home with lead hazards. I lead our ongoing efforts against the opioid industry, and I litigated the recently concluded right to literacy lawsuit, which is the first case of its kind in the nation to establish that children have a constitutional right to literacy. But I'm living out in Ann Arbor, and I decided to run for county prosecutor because I have seen throughout my career, beginning as a public school teacher and through my career in public service, that the criminal justice system is at the center of a tremendous amount of inequity in our country. That's true here locally. Washtenaw County is plagued by some of the most severe racial and socioeconomic inequities in its justice system in the entire state. 70% of the kids in our juvenile detention center are Black, whereas Black people make up just 12% of the population. You are 8.5 times more likely to be held on cash bail if you are Black than if you are white. I have made ending mass incarceration and the vestiges of it the centerpiece of my campaign from the beginning, and I'm looking forward to sharing my vision for the future with you tonight.
Okay, thank you very much, Ellie. And now on to our final candidate, Arianne.
Hello, everyone. Good evening. Thank you so much for taking time to participate in the forum today. And I'm really looking forward to your questions, and to Western Washtenaw Dems, thanks a bunch for hosting this. My name is Arianne Slay, and I grew up in Ann Arbor. Like all of your candidates, we are all Pioneer High School graduates. So for those of you who are at the Dexter Forum, we were all pioneers. I did go to Michigan State for law school, and outside of that time, I've always lived in Washtenaw County after that. And I've always worked in public service. I started working at community corrections a long time ago. And I worked for 3 years there down in the jail with the offender population, working on root causes of what brought them into the system, helping them find jobs, substance abuse treatment, mental health services. And I waited for a while until there was an opening at the prosecutor's office, because that's really where I wanted to work, in my hometown. I worked for a little over 9 years, and during that time I prosecuted everything from drunk driving to homicide. And for the last 3 years, I've been the courtroom prosecutor for the city of Ann Arbor, which has given me the opportunity to bring criminal justice reform in Washtenaw County to life. We've been doing diversion plans, we've been doing deflection, all of which I'm sure we'll get to talk about tonight. But I do have some goals to come forward in 2021. I'm asking for your support. On August 4th or before, if you're voting from home, we have goals to bring restorative and rehabilitative measures to our county instead of a purely punitive system. I have a goal to bring trust with the community, something that law enforcement has not had historically, and to help end mass incarceration. I am the most equipped to lead our community in systematic change. Everything from change with law enforcement to changes within the prosecutor's office itself, and even what we are working for in the legislature. So I'm looking forward to questions tonight. Thanks a bunch.
Okay, thank you very much. And so I think the top 3 questions we have to start off with, I will repeat them every time, since these are not as simple as explain yourself and your background. And so again, in alphabetical order, Hugo, you'll be first. And so the first question is, what is your personal philosophy about the role of the county prosecutor that makes you the best qualified candidate for the position?
Well, my philosophy in terms of the county prosecutor is that, unlike we've had for the last 28 years, there must be an acknowledgement of the humanity of all people. If you're the defendant, my humanity mandates that you be given a fair trial, a fair sentencing, and no prosecutorial misconduct. If you're the victim, my humanity mandates compassion, understanding for you, and making you whole. If you're the police officer, my humanity for you mandates that you be treated with dignity and respect and not denigrated because of the uniform you wear. However, you are held to a very high standard because we give you the ability of life and death at an arm's length away. My humanity for the African-American community. No community will be underprotected or disrespected. My humanity for the Caucasian community. We are in this together, and we cannot ignore the inhumanity to others and pretend that we are in fact humane ourselves. My humanity to the victim of domestic violence. I've defended and protected the rights of over 800 victims of domestic violence. I'm the only one in this race that has stood next to them, been the barrier, the buffer between these largely women and the penitentiary and jail. I've been to their homes, I've held them, I've talked to their parents, their children, trying to keep humanity. And in terms of the average citizen, I am the one that will bring you restorative justice that makes you whole. You see, that's what is important. The wholeness. It is not about prosecution. And in terms of systematic change cannot come from an old situation.
30 seconds.
So for me, in terms of systematic change, you need a change from the top. You can't have old wine and new wineskins and think you're going to get a different flavor. You will not. So systematic change comes from a new approach with historic and understanding of the veterans of slavery that we've had to overcome. We can all overcome it together, but it can't be a big me and a little you. So in terms of diversion and understanding these programs, I've defended juveniles, understand the need for diversion better than anybody else. And I understand the need to bring wholeness to people, and that's exactly what I will do as your next Washtenaw County Prosecuting Attorney.
Okay, yeah, thank you very much, Hugo. Okay, Ellie, what is your personal philosophy about the role of the county prosecutor prosecutor that makes you the best qualified candidate for the position?
Thank you. So I'll say a couple things, and I'll start with some historical background. In this country for decades, we have had prosecutors that have taken the same approach over and over and over again to their job. It's tough on crime, tough on crime, tough on crime. And that is what's fueled the unjust and inequitable system of mass incarceration that we have today. I view things differently. The prosecutor's job is to make sure that justice is done, but also that we are preventing future crimes from ever occurring. And what that means is that we should be investing in rehabilitation, in treatment, diverting people with mental health issues, addiction issues, trauma, out into programs that address the root cause of their criminal behavior, rather than just punishing them repeatedly. We've done a bad job of this as a country, and here in Washtenaw County, we have close to a 70% recidivism rate, which means that nearly 7 out of 10 times, somebody's coming into the justice system, and they're coming right, and they're going to jail, they're going to prison, and they're coming right back out and they're committing crimes again. It's because we failed to invest in people. It's because we failed to prioritize rehabilitation, and it's because we've taken an incarceration first mentality. I want to change that. The other thing is this: we have two systems of justice in this country and in this county. We have a system that applies to poorer people and predominantly racial minorities, and then we have another system that applies to wealthy people, white people, connected people, and to corporations.
30 seconds.
One of the things that is most stark about our county prosecutor's office is that it has failed to take any real measures to hold the connected, the wealthy, and corporations accountable when they break the law and when they harm their community. And ending the two-track system of justice means both ending the criminalization of poverty and also holding corporate actors responsible. I'm the only candidate here that has real experience to spend my life fighting against corporations, fighting against well-resourced defendants, and I will do that as prosecutor.
Okay, all right, thank you, Ellie. Okay, now on to Arianne. Arianne, what is your personal philosophy about the role of the county prosecutor that makes you the best qualified candidate for the position?
Thank you. I can tell you I'm a doer and a fixer. So that we're all wired differently, thank you. And I'm so glad for that, because my husband is an elementary school teacher, and I think if you put me in front of a whole bunch of 10-year-olds, I'd probably have a real hard time. But I've been able to see how the criminal justice system locally is broken, so I understand what needs to be fixed. Almost 3 years ago now, I left the county prosecutor's office in search for an opportunity to really effectuate reform and effectuate those changes. I have been a member of every treatment court in Washtenaw County. Those are our specialty courts, which are meeting our citizens who are justice involved where they are, and making sure that we're giving them help for mental health and substance abuse. I believe in the power to change, because that's what I've been doing for the last 3 years. I've started programs from scratch. Part of being the county prosecutor is understanding that you need collaboration. If we want true criminal justice reform, we're also looking at true social justice reform. And we can't do that alone. Mr. Mack, Mr. Savit, we cannot do that alone. We all need help. We need to look at the root causes as to why people become justice involved to begin with, and being able to just identify that, and access to education, access to healthcare, access to all of the services with that disparity that we're having between so many people in our county, especially our people of color. I don't believe in blanket policies. And if I had wanted to keep things the same when I left the county prosecutor's office, you would have had Brian Mackey's office 2.0. And what you do have is change, and you have programs that are working. And I've created this blueprint that I'm ready to bring back home to the county. We can make this county-wide and eventually statewide. I'm looking forward to it.
Okay, all right, thank you, Arianne. Okay, and now on to our next question, starting with Hugo. What do you feel is the relationship between the prosecutor's office and the various police departments within the county, and what opportunities do you see for improvement?
Well, first of all, if you go to hugoforprosecutor2020.com, you will see my message to law enforcement. And that was made several months ago before the Floyd tragedy came about. In terms of the relationship between prosecutor and police, I've made it very, very clear, which is one reason I'm not getting support from the police, is that there should be a partnership, not a friendship, that exists between the county prosecutor and police. For the last 25 plus years, there's been a friendship, there's been a wink and a nod. Let me tell you something. If you don't remember anything that I'm saying about the relationship between police and prosecutor, remember this. Every case that comes across my desk has got a mantra, okay? New case, new cop. You will not build up integrity points with me because you and I have worked together on some other cases in the past. That is the problem right now. So for me, prosecutors and police come January 2021 will have a partnership, not a friendship. If an individual, I want to make this very, very clear. If an individual hurts somebody, whether that be putting their knee on somebody's neck, whether that be through choking somebody out, whether that be jumping on somebody's back and riding them like they're a horse at a rodeo, it is no excuse to come to me and say, well, our department allows that kind of conduct. I don't care if your department allows that kind of conduct. If you hurt one of my citizens, you're going to deal with me directly. I cannot put it any clearer than that. We need good law enforcement. I respect law enforcement. I'm going to be working with law enforcement. But anytime you give a group of people the ability to determine life and death at an arm's length away, regardless of their citizenship, they must be held to a higher scrutiny. So that is the relationship that we will have. So in terms of accountability, training is wonderful. To say we need more training, more sensitivity. I beg to differ a little bit. If a person, when they come to the police academy or the sheriff's department, they don't know basic civil rights, they don't know about slavery, they don't need to be in the police department. They need to be back in the 3rd grade. The way we address police brutality is through accountability. That is what's necessary. And I want every law enforcement officer to know I respect you. I will never let a good cop be lionized or a bad cop be crucified. We're in this together, but you will be held accountable for your conduct like everybody else.
Okay, thank you, Hugo. Ellie, what do you feel is the relationship between the prosecutor's office and the various police departments within the county, and what opportunities do you see for improvement?
Sure. So, prosecutors necessarily are going to work closely with police. That's just part of the job. And I think there's some opportunities to, help build better relationships on the front end. One thing that I hear, officers say repeatedly is that the prosecutor's office never keeps them updated about the cases they're going through the system, and I think we should change that. But fundamentally, we need to recognize this. We have policing problems in this country, and Washtenaw County is not immune. So though the prosecutor's office is a different branch, it's a different jurisdiction, the prosecutor has a lot that they can do to check police misconduct. And I'll say some very specific things here, because prosecutors in many ways facilitate police misconduct. Racial profiling is an issue. People can be stopped for driving while black, and it gives the officer an excuse to search the vehicle, and sometimes it provides evidence of a crime, and sometimes, many times, it doesn't. But the incentive to do that is because the prosecutors are all too happy to charge crimes that were based on racial profiling. I'm not going to do that as prosecutor. If we see that a stop was motivated by racial profiling, if it was a pretextual stop, we won't charge a contraband crime that came out of it. Prosecutors often sweep misconduct and constitutional violations by the police under the rug during plea bargaining negotiations, because a defendant will have a real constitutional claim that something wrong was done to them, and the prosecutor will require them to drop that claim, not allow it to be litigated, in exchange for a better deal. That's wrong. It sweeps misconduct under the rug, and we will not do that as prosecutor. So there are real specific things the prosecutor can and should do to check misconduct, and I will do that as prosecutor.
Okay, thank you, Ellie. Okay, now on to Arianne. Arianne, what do you feel is the relationship between the prosecutor's office and the various police departments within the county, and what opportunities do you see for improvement?
Well, it's definitely needs improvement, but I'd like to share with you some of the things that I have done. So first and foremost, I think the relationship should be that of culture change. That's something that we need to lead, and that for being the chief law enforcement officer of the county as a prosecutor, you are responsible for leading that culture change and working with your chiefs and all 442 of our sworn police officers in county now. I have been working with the city of Ann Arbor to lead our policy changes since I've been there for almost 3 years. That does include everything from use of force to our police contact and just saying hi in traffic stops and making sure that they are up to date and using the best practices that we have. In addition to that, I have been at MCOLS, which is the Michigan Coalition on Law Enforcement Standards. I've been an instructor for almost 10 years. So I wrote the curriculum for domestic violence and strangulation. And I can tell you that our cops do better when they know better. The more time we can spend in training for implicit bias, for domestic violence, for teaching them to be trauma-informed individuals, the more opportunities we have to have systemic change in our culture. In addition to that, I'm also the staff liaison for the Independent Police Commission in Ann Arbor, which is a brand new commission up this year, and they're doing fantastic things where they're reviewing policies, they're reviewing discipline of the police, they are holding police accountable. I'll also say that I've had the opportunity to prosecute police officers in the past. I believe that if they are engaged in criminal wrongdoing, that they should be prosecuted. But if they are officers in this county, they should not be prosecuted by this county prosecutor's office. It lends itself to the appearance of impropriety. It should be made by an independent third party. I do commend the sheriff for sending that to the attorney general for our most recent case that's being reviewed right now regarding the Grady L family. So I do appreciate that, and that will continue under my administration. We will not prosecute cases where the officers are working collaboratively with us Monday through Friday. So we will be pushing that forward to another jurisdiction. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Arianne. And our final question before we hit up the chat questions. So first to Hugo, what does restorative justice look like to you? Please give specific examples, especially based upon your personal experience, either as a prosecutor, attorney, or defendant, or family member experience.
Great question. First of all, let's deal with restorative justice for the person that is a returning citizen, all right? One of the things that we need to understand, Washtenaw County is the 4th richest county in the state, yet we have one of the highest recidivism rates. Somehow there's a disconnect. I testified in front of the Ypsilanti City Council, for example, and encouraged them to pass an ordinance banning the box. In other words, please give people an opportunity to express their humanity. You know, it's so interesting when we talk about someone owes a debt to society and a debt has to be paid. A man by the name of Roosevelt once told us, no man is above the law. But a lot of people forget the other part of that statement. Neither is he or she beneath it. When an individual is a returning citizen, we do not make ourselves safer by deriding, haranguing, discriminating against that person. As you well know, in the state of Michigan, a person with a criminal justice involvement in large measure cannot sit on a jury. So what we do is we tell them, regardless of you paying a debt, we're going to say you owed a debt and that you paid it, but we continue to harass and punish you. That is not making us safe. So the way we bring restorative justice, first of all, to the returning citizen is by allowing them to fully reintegrate without discrimination, because otherwise we make them the victim. Now let me make a statement to somebody who considers themselves a victim rights advocate. When you discriminate against a person that's paid a debt, you make them a victim, and you become the very thing that you say you decry. Now, in terms of restorative justice for the police, I will never allow a good cop to be crucified or a bad one to be lionized. And so for me, that's important. And so restorative justice, it means when I'm out in the community and I'm not looking for parking meter change, I'm talking to people. They know they've got a prosecutor that cares about them. They know they've got a prosecutor that didn't just parachute from heaven to be with them, one who came up from hell to be with them. I understand the defendant. I understand the victim. I understand the need for justice. I understand the need for safety, and we do not make each other safe when we exclude people. Justice belongs to everybody. We do not have a right to keep it onto ourselves.
Okay, thank you, Hugo. So Ellie, what does restorative justice look like to you? Please give specific examples, especially based on your personal experience, either as a prosecutor, attorney, or defendant yourself.
So restorative justice, it's a term that people like to throw around a lot, but it has a very specific meaning. And by the way, I'll note that I am a big proponent of restorative justice. We are going to have a restorative justice-based system when I am prosecutor, and I'm proud to be endorsed by Restorative Justice International, which is a coalition of 6,000 restorative justice practitioners and groups across the globe. And what restorative justice is, it's a process at the survivor of a crime's choice. They can opt for restorative justice, and when they do, it takes it away from the more adversarial system of justice. And after intensive preparation, the victim and the person who committed harm sit down together. The person who committed harm accepts responsibility for what they did. They acknowledge the harm that they have done. And then the two sides work together to come up with a plan for how, as best possible, they can mend the harm that has been done. It's an individualized process, and you can see often people say things like, I want you to do community service or pay restitution, or just, I want you to continue your education and get a job because I don't want this to happen to somebody else again. It's a powerful system. The statistics show that people are less likely to recidivate, to return to a crime if they've gone through the restorative justice process. The statistics also show that when given a choice, 90% of survivors, and I want to pause on that, 90% opt for restorative justice rather than the adversarial system. I was just out today protesting in front of the county courthouse because there was a case being sentenced today in which the victim of the crime begged to go into restorative justice, did not want to see the person that harmed him go to prison. And the prosecutor objected, ignored the victim's survivor's voices, refused even to read his victim impact statement because he didn't want a harsh sentence. That's not restorative justice. That's not listening to survivors, and we will change that when I'm prosecutor.
Okay, thank you, Ellie. And finally, Arianne, what does restorative justice look like to you? Please give specific examples, especially based on your personal experience as a prosecutor or attorney or defendant yourself.
Sure. Well, I've been a certified mediator since 2004. And so restorative justice has very similar principles to mediation: the accountability, the understanding, and then a resolution. You don't necessarily have to have a specific victim because sometimes it's a community that's aggrieved based on the alleged conduct. But I see it working in our community on 3 different fronts. And the first 2, I've been able to use it for the city of Ann Arbor for the last few years. That is pre-charge, in the sense that we offer you a restorative justice or a peace circle or an opportunity to mediate your situation with your victim or a representative from the community, and we don't charge your case. There's a post-charge where we can, you may be charged with a crime, but then we decide going through it that the victim or the community member changes their mind and they'd like to participate. We can do that as well. And what we're looking for is a fair resolution that promotes accountability and promotes healing. And the third one, which I haven't been able to do since I've been at the city, because I'll be honest, the people who are in my court aren't going to jail. They're post-conviction cases. And so how that works kind of came to me after I was working on my first homicide case. I'll tell you, the victim impact statement in that was just absolutely gut-wrenching. Children were talking about how their mom wasn't going to be with them anymore. And I heard tremendous sobbing coming from the back of the courtroom. And I dared to look back, and when I did, what I saw was the defendant's mother and the victim's children holding each other. They were each losing each other. They lost someone in their life. They weren't going to see them again. So they did have the opportunity to use restorative justice a couple years down the line to let the offender know that they had forgiven him for what had happened to their mother. And I have to believe that that affected not just the life of the 4 children that were remaining, but for the life of the defendant and his family as well. So I absolutely believe in it, and I hope to start restorative justice practices outside of the juvenile court and actually include the adults as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Arianne. Okay, so now we're going to go ahead to the chat window, and I'm going to go ahead and not necessarily do these in order. There was one question that sort of dovetails well into our last question, so I'm going to start with that one. So we'll be starting again in alphabetical order. So Hugo, you'll be first. The question is providing rehabilitation services within a corrections facility when a person has already been incarcerated productive restorative justice, Or will it ultimately contribute to the 70% recidivism rate? And what does rehabilitation look like when you imagine yourself as a prosecutor?
Well, okay, first of all, we need to understand that under the Engler administration, we closed the stopgap between the streets and prisons. There were treatment centers, mental health facilities, all right? So now what's happened is individuals with mental health, and we cannot underestimate the impact of mental health on the criminal justice system. People who need help, they don't need incarceration and punishment. So what happens is these individuals get charged, and despite our well efforts, and I disagree with some people in this, you cannot help people without jurisdiction. So anybody who says, well, we don't need to charge anybody is a fallacy, because otherwise you're just leaving it voluntary. So we do need some form of charges, not towards punishment or giving somebody a record, but simply to get them in the system. So in terms of me, mental health is a big issue. So what happens is the jails become ill-equipped. Jail personnel, sheriffs, are not trained psychologists, but yet they're being asked to form the role of a psychologist, of a psychiatrist, of a social worker. They are ill-equipped to do that. So what happens is, I don't believe in divesting the police or eliminating police, but I do think we need to put more money in mental health and social work in the jail system. So individuals can get short-term help in a jail, but if they go to the penitentiary, I can tell you, they're not going to receive a whole bunch of help and resources there. I personally can tell you, seeing people lined up like they were giving out government checks in what they call a med line, people being medicated, literally being walking zombies. That is not the answer. We've got to use like that $80 million that the millage passed about 2 or 3 years ago to address mental health right here in Washtenaw County. That's how we're going to be able to do it. We're going to be able to stop that pipeline from the streets to the penitentiary. So for me, that's all part of restorative justice, understanding their humanity. And when I'm prosecutor, you better believe that a person's mental health, if they've got a history of domestic violence, all that's going to be considered when we proceed, because once again, we're interested in making people whole. When we make people whole, we protect everybody. Lock them up, throw away the key simply does not work.
Okay, thank you, Hugo. Hey, Ellie, the question is providing rehabilitation services within a corrections facility when a person has already been incarcerated productive restorative justice, or will it ultimately contribute to the 70% recidivism rate? And what does rehabilitation look like when you imagine yourself as prosecutor?
We need to move away from the fallacy that jails and prisons are the answer to everything. If you had a broken leg, we wouldn't say go to prison, or jail, you'll get medical attention, and that will fix your broken leg. Mental health, addiction, trauma, those are all health issues, just like physical health. And just shuffling people in and out of jail and prison, no matter what services, and I think there should be those services there, but ultimately, jails and prisons aren't rehabilitative, and they don't set people on the right track. And I want to share a story with permission from somebody, we've been calling voters across the county that I talked to on the phone just yesterday, and it's heart-wrenching. This is a woman whose daughter was raped while she was in high school. And ultimately, the prosecutor's office did not prosecute the assailant. And she ended up having severe mental health and addiction issues. And the family begged to be diverted out of the system, to not have her go to jail. But repeatedly, she was put into jail for short stints, came back out, continued down a path where her trauma and her mental health issues and her addiction were going untreated. The young lady, unfortunately, was murdered as a result of the failure to address that root cause of why she was coming into the criminal justice system, the failure to set her on the path to rehabilitation. Jails and prisons aren't the answer to everything. We need to work to divert people, to deflect them out of the justice system, provide these services without the need for incarceration. Incarceration does not work. It is not the answer. You can see it from our 70% recidivism rate. You can see it from the thousands of tragic stories that we have in this county and across the nation.
My apologies.
Oh, thank you, Ellie. Okay, now on to Arianne. Arianne, is providing rehabilitation services within a corrections facility when a person has already been incarcerated productive restorative justice, or will it ultimately contribute to the 70% recidivism rate? And what does rehabilitation look like when you imagine yourself as prosecutor?
So I can tell you about my experience in the sobriety court and mental health court, veterans treatment court. I've been a part of all of them. My favorite, and this isn't a secret, is the mental health treatment court. And what we do there is that we meet people where they are. So addressing whatever their root cause is, and success looks different for everyone. Sometimes for those who are in crisis for mental health, coming up with a solid treatment plan, having access to medication, and having peer support so that when they leave the program that they are more stable and in a better place, that's success. For other people, it just looks different. What I can promise you is that we won't have the blanket policies of yesteryear, where we're not taking a look at individual people. What I do in the city of Ann Arbor is we come up with a plan, whether that's pre-charge as a deflection or post-charge, to make sure that we are addressing the root cause of what needs to happen. I can tell you I've sat in many felony sentencing courts, and it looks a little something like this. They just start reading off these probation conditions, and they're the exactly same for everyone. $1,170 fines and cost, $75 crime victims' rights fee, no use of illegal drugs, and I could go on. And I could probably perform most of the sentences without even meeting anyone. What we need is individual treatment so that we are addressing the root cause of what's happening. That's what I'm doing in the city of Ann Arbor, and I have been doing for years. So it won't be true restorative justice to give someone treatment. I believe, though, that the people who should be in the jail are the ones who are dangerous to our community. I don't believe that people who are suffering from mental illness, people who are suffering from substance abuse, if they're not a danger, they shouldn't be in jail, and we should be in treatment program. That's why I'm happy to support the sheriff's program of LEAD, which is the Law Enforcement Assisted Diversion Program that will be starting up hopefully by 2021. It's already funded, so that's fantastic. That's always a barrier. And what we do is take people who are in crisis and we get them help, and we're not charging their cases and saddling them with a criminal conviction. So that's how we change recidivism in Washtenaw County. Thank you.
Thank you, Arianne. Okay, it looks like if I'm checking my time right, we have time for 2 more questions from the chat and then our final question of the night. So this question's a little bit different than the others, and I think it's just getting at more of your personal philosophy and goals. And so the question was, how have you helped your community personally? What have you done outside of your jobs, perhaps? So things that are required in your current role to do for the community. What other things have you done to contribute? And so we'll go ahead and start with Hugo to answer that question.
Well, you know, they say the best job in the world to have is something you love to do anyway. So for me, in terms of my outreach to the community, it really is tied in with my job, because with my job as an attorney, there's so many people I can help. 30% of my practice now, indigent women, victims of domestic violence, there are no social programs to help them. There are no directors in some big office to help them, all right? There are only people like me willing to reach out and help them with their humanity, with housing, with transportation, with education, childcare, all right? Not just in Washtenaw County, regionally, in Inkster and in Detroit. So for me, in terms of reaching out, I love to go to church groups, I love to go to civic groups and talk and be able to explain what restorative justice truly is. You know, the thing of it is, restorative justice starts with each and every one of us. So for me, the greatest joy that I have, you know, and I thank God for the ability to go out and do things, is to talk to people about their responsibility. Voting is important, but a sense of duty to somebody else. When I go, for example, to the New West Willow Neighborhood Association, and I see people coming together in communities to work with law enforcement, work with fire protection, to be able to make themselves better, nobody's paying them for that. They're doing that out of a civic sense of duty and wholeness, because those folks have got it right. There is no big me and little you when it comes to law enforcement and safety. We all have a role to play, and that's why, so for me, in terms of my involvement in different social groups and groups on campus, helping young people, that's what I love to do, you know, and it's one of those kind of things where either you feel it inside of you or you don't. It's not something you can pretend, you know, because I believe as integrity is really what you do when nobody is watching. Community service is what you do when nobody's watching, when you're helping poor people, you're not being compensated for it. So that's what I do. My job is part of my life. It's a very big part of my life, and it's what I do, and I segue between the two. And so far it's worked out so good. So thank God, hopefully things will continue for me.
Okay, thank you, Hugo. Ellie, so what are some examples of things that you've done in your personal time and life that aren't related to your current role as job, career, responsibilities that have contributed to the community?
Sure. So I'll just start with a few things. You know, I'm on a number of boards of directors. I'm on the board of directors of Washtenaw Families Against Narcotics, the national board of directors of the Public Rights Project, which is an organization that seeks to further public interest lawsuits. I work to build our early childhood system across the state. I'm on the Hope Starts Here early childhood board. I also just try to be out in the community and volunteer. Beyond my job on boards and as a lawyer, you know, I've been out throughout the pandemic and helping distribute lunches alongside teachers and educators at the Ypsilanti community schools to families who have had their meal service disrupted as a result of the pandemic. But I'm also a lawyer, and I realize I'm privileged to be a lawyer, and I try to use my legal skills pro bono to help wherever I can. And I'm proud to have been involved in some major efforts here in the state of Michigan to build a better society for all of us. In 2017 and 2018, I worked pro bono with Equality Michigan, which is one of our leading LGBTQ advocacy groups here in Michigan, to successfully convince the Michigan Civil Rights Commission that discrimination on the basis of sexual orientation and gender identity is barred under Michigan state law. I regularly serve as a pro bono cooperating attorney for the ACLU of Michigan. I don't get paid for this. It's not part of my job, but I work with them, file voting rights briefs. I've litigated a couple of those this year up in the Michigan Supreme Court. And every election day, I volunteer with the Michigan Democratic Party, take some time off of work, and I coordinate voter protection volunteers from across the state of Michigan, lawyers who are standing at the polls defending our rights to vote. We always do it from the basement of or windowless room in one of the casinos in Detroit. Get up at 4 in the morning and work all day, but that's how I've spent my election days for the past several cycles. We're all privileged to be lawyers, and I think we have a responsibility to, in our spare time in a pro bono capacity, do what we can to bring justice forward.
Okay, thank you, Ellie. And so, Arianne, for your personal experience and contributions to the community that are unrelated to your current role in profession, please give examples of ways you've contributed to the community.
Well, and maybe this started because of my profession, but I've always held domestic violence and sexual assault survivors very near and dear to my heart. Oh goodness, we're going to be, it's our 6th year, COVID provided, hopefully we'll be hosting it again this year, but a friend of mine and I started a 5K to support Safe House Center. It's called the Purple Run. It happens every October during Domestic Violence Awareness Month. And it really just came out of a need to support a very important institution in our community, which is Safe House. Most recently, I guess, I become the face mask queen. You know, campaigning is hard work, and sometimes it's hard to de-stress or even sleep. So in the middle of the night, sometimes you just got to sew. So I'm making a lot of face masks. I also teach people how to swim. And I do that on a volunteer basis, but I specialize with adults who have had a phobia or fear around being around water. I was very blessed to learn how to swim at a young age and swim collegiately. So I want to bring my love for the water to other people as well. But I do have a couple of side jobs that are somewhat related. I'll tell you, about 10 years ago, I was really having a hard time seeing some of the stuff at work with police officers not doing the right thing. And I would do what I was supposed to do, which was report the bad behavior, but it wasn't enough. And so I became a certified police instructor. I teach at our local police academies, and I teach at police academies across the state. And that wasn't enough. So I also teach with the Prosecutors Association of Michigan. And while it's not related to my current job, I think it's important to provide mentorship for the young attorneys who are coming up in this field so that they are more progressive and more versed than I am. I truly value diversity of thought, so I think that's super important. Thank you.
Thank you, Arianne. Okay, so on to our final chat question before the final question of the night. So I'm going to go, the question I selected is primarily based on the fact that several others I think are also curious of the answer. And so Hugo, the question is from Garrett, and he says, I'm concerned about a transparent prosecutor's office. What will you do to make the prosecutor's office more accessible?
Great question. Well, first of all, once again, leadership starts at the top, all right? What I'm going to do is, if you've got a problem with the prosecutor's office, you don't have to protest and picket. Come up to me, let me know, we'll set up an appointment, you can talk to me. So in terms of transparency, you know, first and foremost, my responsibility is going to be to look after the people of Washtenaw County. So I believe in transparency, I believe in people being able to see records, but I've got a mantra that I'm going to tell you. I don't promise if I can't pay. You know, I don't have control of the purse strings, all right? Now, we can appeal for grants, there's no question about that. But I've got to be limited by what the county commissioners give me. So I will have as much transparency as possible, given the budget that we have, all right? You know, there's Freedom of Information Act, which we already have. Individuals can look up any case they want, all right, by going to court, by asking my office for records. I believe if we can have a way, for example, people can look at current crime trends or what have you, if I can pay for it. I think the last thing people in Washtenaw County need is somebody running for office that makes them all these promises that they cannot pay for. So in terms of me, in terms of transparency, I'm going to be there. If there's a problem with me or one of my prosecutors, come and talk to me. I talk to prosecutors, believe it or not, and one of them has been very clear. We need more help, all right? So I got to be honest with you. If it's a cost between getting a dashboard or hiring another assistant prosecuting attorney to help bring restorative justice to you and your family, I'm going to go with that assistant prosecuting attorney because that is what's necessary to bring restorative justice to you. So I'm all for transparency and I will advance it given the financial resources to do so.
Thank you, Hugo. So Ellie, the question is, I'm concerned about a transparent prosecutor's office. What will you do to make the prosecutor's office more accessible?
You should be concerned about a transparent prosecutor's office because the prosecutor works for you, and too frequently the business of the prosecutor's office goes on behind closed doors and there is no transparency and people don't know what their county prosecutor is doing. But every time we scratch the surface with this prosecutor's office, we see indicators of severe racial disparities in this system. I mentioned a couple of them at the start of our presentation. 70% of the kids in the juvenile detention center are Black. 8.5 times more likely to be held on cash bail if you are Black than if you are white. And so lack of transparency isn't just bad in and of itself. It masks a lot of inequity and injustice that is being done systemically in our justice system. I don't think that it's sufficient to just tell the public, look, you got to look up the case, you can FOIA stuff, and that counts as transparency and accountability. Prosecutors should be putting out the work that they are doing for the public to see. And if you want to know how I'm going to do that, I invite you to take a look at the Washtenaw County Prosecutor's Office's current website, where you can see basically the name of the prosecutor and the address of the prosecuting attorney's office, and that's it. And then take a look at the websites from district attorneys in Philadelphia and Chicago. They have reports easily accessible to everybody that show, bail determinations, charging decisions, racial disparities in the justice system, the number of people that are getting opportunities for diversion programs and treatment rather than incarceration. You can go on there and you can see exactly what your county prosecutor is doing and the metrics by which they claim to be judging their success. This should be basic. Prosecutors work for you, and we shouldn't hide behind closed doors any longer, because not only does it make us unaccountable to you, It masks real injustice, and you will have something transparent and accountable online when I am prosecutor. I guarantee that.
Okay, thank you, Ellie. Okay, Arianne, you're up next. The question is, I'm concerned about a transparent prosecutor's office. What will you do to make the prosecutor's office more accessible?
Well, I can tell you accessibility has always been a huge problem. So I can tell you as a young prosecutor, I was told that we don't go out into the community. We don't mix that up with the community. We want to have the appearance of impropriety at all times. And that was just not something that was done. But I will tell you this, you have seen me in the community and you will continue to see me in the community as well as the staff as frequently as we possibly can. And having that accessibility and letting everyone know what our office policies and procedures are when you have an issue, how to share that with the prosecutor's office. Being part of our community will promote transparency. I have been a strong proponent of every law enforcement agency in Washtenaw County joining the county sheriff and soon to be Ann Arbor Police Department and putting their policies and procedures online. That holds true for the prosecutor's office as well. Those should be clickable things. What you will see if you go into the prosecutor's office, if you are allowed to look behind that door, is a program that looks a lot like the Oregon Trail. Now, I might be dating myself in age, but that was a great computer program in the DOS system where everyone had dysentery and you had to shoot buffalo. And that's about the level of technology that they have. And almost every county in Michigan uses that, which prohibits a lot of transparency. And the governor recently held a commission to take a look at things like bail and charging decisions and looking at our criminal justice system and putting us on this great path for reform. One of her biggest sells is that we have to have data with our community. I will go ahead and drop a copy of the report in there. It is a fantastic read. If you don't have time, skip to the executive summary. That very last point talks about data. That data and the opportunity to collect it should be shared with the public. And I do support that, and I support our governor in that contention as well. So let me go ahead and drop that into the chat. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. So we're going to go ahead and hit our last, I should say, question of the night. But just to reiterate, we did post in the invite all of the links to each of the candidates' pages so you can get more information there. And I'm sure if you didn't have a question answered tonight, they'd be more than willing to answer that through their personal pages. So the final question of tonight, Hugo going first, is why do you want to be the county prosecutor?
First of all, thank you so much for having this very informative and wonderful forum. I want to be the county prosecutor because my life experience makes me uniquely qualified to be a minister of justice. I want to be the county prosecutor because I know what it's like growing up in Ann Arbor as a young Black man, working to become the second Black Eagle Scout in this county's history. But nevertheless, despite that, having guns pulled on me by the Ann Arbor Police Department in a case of mistaken identity. Some African-American kid with an afro supposedly had a weapon. It wasn't me. I could easily have been killed. I'm running for prosecutor because I know what it's like for every person who's been abused or done wrong by the police to stare down the barrel of not one but 5 guns. It almost terrifies me now in my older age, my latter years, to realize what could easily have happened to me back then, okay? Because I don't want other people to experience that. I'm running for prosecutor because I will match my trial and administrative experience against anybody in this race. I'm running for prosecutor because I know what it's like to defend poor Black kids for 6 years. I don't think anybody else can say that. I'm running for prosecutor because I know what it's like to defend the rights of over 800 victims of domestic violence. I'm running for prosecutor because I have prosecuted cases terminating parental rights, the hardest cases in the world to prosecute. Plenty of prosecutorial grits is in my system, and I don't have a problem doing it. I'm running for prosecutor because I want people to know our best days are ahead of us, and we do not make ourselves safe by denigrating, humiliating people that come back to our society. I know what it's like to be on the other side. I know what it's like to fight back from nothing, and I know what it's like to stand up for right and integrity, regardless of the consequences. I know what it's like to face insurmountable odds standing on truth and justice, and thank God and Jesus Christ for prevailing. I will be your minister of justice to protect all of you. I know what it's like to be in a fight. I know what it's like to persevere. I know what it's like to come out and I know what it's like to stand up for you, and that's exactly what I'm going to do as your next county prosecutor.
Thank you, Hugo. So Ellie, the final question is, why do you want to be our county prosecutor?
I never thought that I would be running for county prosecutor. I'm a civil rights lawyer. I've spent my career in that field pursuing the public interest and working to protect families and to safeguard all of our rights. But what I've seen throughout my career is that the criminal justice system is at the center of so much inequity and injustice, and it radiates outwards into our communities. Criminal justice system splits families apart. When we hold people on cash bail for minor offenses simply because they are too poor to pay to get out. That impacts somebody's ability to keep a job. The data shows, for example, that after just 3 days in jail, somebody's likely to lose their job if they're poor or working class. That affects their ability to maintain their housing. Their kids will have to switch schools, and I know this from my background in education as a teacher. When kids are switching schools in the middle of the school year, they lose, on average, 6 months of academic growth. So you see these cascading consequences. And in my work fighting for civil rights, in my work as a teacher, in my work fighting for the public interest, I've seen how the criminal justice system is a roadblock to achieving a society that is fair and equitable and that works for everybody. And it matters who the prosecutor is. It matters that we have somebody that is committed, fully committed, to ending the era of mass incarceration. It matters that we have somebody that has prioritized fighting for civil rights, racial and socioeconomic equity throughout their careers. It matters that we have a civil rights lens on this, because criminal justice reform is the civil rights issue of our time, and we need to address it as such. And that is why I am running for county prosecutor.
Okay, thank you, Ellie. Arianne, final question of tonight is, why do you want to be our county prosecutor?
Well, I can tell you that prosecution has been near and dear to my heart, but more often than not, it's broken it. I see how our system is broken. And when I left the county prosecutor's office almost 3 years ago, I was dedicated to making change. It would have been much easier just to continue the same old policies, not have to give any thought to it, and not work towards reform. Reforms that a lot of people were not ready for, I will tell you that, but we have brought them along. And we're showing that it's working right now in our community. I can tell you that when I was a new prosecutor, we might have 3 or 4 homicides a year. And most recently, we hit a high this year where we had 42 open homicide cases. That is a very extremely high number. And I have to take a look back and say, what were we doing that was leading to this? What are we doing as a community? And yes, it has to do with the prosecutor's office, but it has to do with the collaboration of all of our social justice services. We have to be working together on that. I'm ready to lead this community in change, in systematic changes. That I've made changes since I've been with the city of Ann Arbor, and thankfully with working with this brand new police chief, we're making even more. We are making headway. Now I can tell you that police training, very important, but it's only as good as the accountability. It goes the same thing with the prosecutors. We can train them on implicit bias. We can train them to be diversity, equity, and inclusion officers and ministers of justice. But if we don't hold them accountable for what we've trained them for, it's for naught. If we want lasting systemic changes, we need to change the culture. And I am best situated in this race to bring true, lasting change to Washtenaw County. And sometimes that means I'm at a protest, and sometimes that means I am sitting at my desk drafting new policy, because I am thankful right now we have the appetite for change in a lot of our community leaders that we didn't have a month ago. This is a fight that Black folks have been fighting for a very long time. But I will tell you this, we will take advantage of the appetite for change now, and we will make lasting, systemic changes in Washtenaw County that will be the blueprint, not just for this state, but for this country. You will be proud to be a Washtenaw County resident. And part of that starts with picking the right prosecutor. Thank you much for your support, and I hope to either have your vote at home or on August 4th.
Thank you very much, Arianne. Just as a reminder, tonight's session is recorded. It will be posted on our Facebook page and also on our YouTube channel. And so please feel free to share those videos and those links with those of your friends and family who couldn't necessarily join us tonight, but are hopefully highly interested in this race. And I'll turn it over now to Jennifer to wrap up tonight.
Thanks, Christina, and thanks for doing such a great job of moderating. I wanted to say thank you to all of our candidates. This was a very good, well-spent evening. I appreciated all of your forthrightness and your willingness to answer all of our questions. So great job, and thank you very, very much.